Ribosomes are super important. All organelles in the cell are pretty important, but ribosomes, when we talk about the fact that all cells make something, okay, whether it's an enzyme or a molecule of some sort that they export. Okay, remember when we were talking about the t-shirt factory, they make t-shirts, and those t-shirts get shipped all over the world, right? And people wear those t-shirts all over the world. Well, inside that factory of a cell, we've got a lot of little organelles called ribosomes. And ribosomes are one of the tiniest organelles inside the cell, but just because they're tiny doesn't mean they're not important. A ribosome, if you actually look at the shape of a ribosome, it almost looks like a Pac-Man that's chomping down, in that it's got a very small bit on the bottom, and it's got a much larger bit on the top, okay? And what ends up happening in terms of a ribosome's function, and we're getting into stuff that's way beyond what I'm expecting you to understand, but if I tell you that your cells make proteins, all right, that is the job of your cell, it's to make proteins. Proteins have various steps in terms of their making. So think of it this way. If a cell is making proteins, okay, and at the end of the day, it's exporting those proteins. There's different stages of protein making. If we look at the t-shirt idea, first things first, you got to get the material, the cotton for your t-shirt. Then you've got to roll out the cotton. You've got to cut the cotton in terms of certain shapes. Then you've got to start sewing parts of it on. Okay, then somebody's in charge of putting the little, laundry tag on it, and they make it different sizes, and a lot happens to t-shirts before they actually finally get shipped out, right? In those boxes or packages. The same thing is true about the proteins that your cells make. Ribosomes are in charge of making the original strand of protein. And that strand, okay, has to have a specific organization of small little molecules called amino acids. Your body has about 20 different amino acids in it. And every protein in your body is made up of specific organization of a mixture of these 20 amino acids. And here's the really cool thing about ribosomes. Okay? Ribosomes are in charge of taking genetic information from your DNA and translating that into a protein that your cell has to make. So what they do is they take a code and they transcribe that code into actual letters. If you've ever played around with things like ciphers or word jumbles, where you find, in French we call them mots cachés, if you look for actual, words in a puzzle, and then specific letters have to be reassigned to make a new word at the end, it's kind of like what ribosomes do. Ribosomes decipher DNA code, and what they do is they make these pearl-like chains that come out of the actual ribosome, okay, and it goes on and on and on. Some proteins can have upwards of 2,000, like 2,000 or so, and even more of these little individual balls. And when we talk about a ribosome like this, okay, when we talk about a ribosome that's in the actual cell and it's making this, the end result looks kind of like a ribbon. And that ribbon is made to look like a specific protein and to behave like a specific protein. This ribbon then travels, if I'm in a cell here, and I've got my nucleus, and then I've got my endoplasmic reticulum, right? My rough endoplasmic reticulum that has all my ribosomes embedded on it. they're going to make these strands of proteins, and these strands of proteins are then going to get shipped to another organelle that we didn't actually talk about. That's the Golgi body. Okay, the Golgi apparatus, named after Mr. Golgi, who discovered it. He was the first to discover what it does. And that organelle actually takes that strand of protein that your ribosome made, and it creates this three-dimensional shape that's folded a specific way. Okay? It twists it and turns it and makes this three-dimensional structure. And that is the end product that gets shipped out of the cell. So without the ribosome, we don't have that initial strand of protein that the rest of the cell can actually reform to make something cool. And just to give you an idea of what a protein looks like, let's look at something that every one of your red blood cells has. It's a protein called hemoglobin. You would not be alive without it. It's what captures oxygen in your lungs and allows blood to transport oxygen to all the cells in your body so that your mitochondria can undergo cellular respiration. When we talk about what a ribosome does, okay, ribosomes make these strands of amino acids here, known as proteins, but those proteins are not ready to be shipped out like that. They're useless like that. So the cell has to basically ship them properly. It has to finish the packaging of the protein. It's got to fold the shirts properly, make sure the crests are on there, make sure the right sizes are there, make sure the packages are labeled, put all the t-shirts in the box, close up the box, tape it up, and then when it's ready, the box gets shipped out. Okay, but the shirt itself is not, okay, this is not ready to be shipped out. This over here is final project. Okay, and none of that happens. This whole final project does not happen without the ribosomes. Their job is to start the making of these proteins, these long strands. So that's why when we look at the function of a ribosome, its function is protein synthesis, the making of proteins. Because without ribosomes, we have no proteins. Okay, without ribosomes, your endoplasmic reticulum doesn't have much use, and your Golgi apparatus does not have any use because it's what ships out the proteins. Okay? But if we don't have any proteins, if proteins aren't being made, there's really no point to that cell. So that's why ribosomes are so important. Okay?